welcome to Kick It To Me, the podcast by your favourite Collingwood supporting Nuffy. I'm assuming you have one. If you don't, well, I'm happy to, adopt that role. But it's made for you, so I just work on the feedback and we go from there. Anyway, overall, what a round. Round 18. The 8 is, I think, all but locked in for the most part. I think you'd say the top 7 are safe. I mean, could in theory slip out, but I don't see it. And I think, hot take, the team that finishes 8th, well, they're probably just making up the numbers at this point. And if you finish 5th, I think you get a fairly, you're confident looking at that win. But anyway, this show will look at the round recap for what's just gone. And I'm going to try and change the format of that up a bit. I'm going to sort of look at a few talking points, and I'm going to go straight into sort of the question of the week for that team and do that for every team. After that, we're going to look at a crappy media call I saw this week. This time we're going to go into the realms of social media. And then we're going to go to team of the week, look at round previews, finally ending on Supercoach captaincy. I'm going to focus more on the captaincy option because my team is complete wank. So we'll go from there. Anyway, let's get into it. So, round recap time. And we started off with the Western Bulldogs up against St Kilda in what can only be described as a essentially disappointing game. I think for all the hype and where these teams were on the ladder, I expected something a lot better than what was served up. Bulldogs had the running. And yes, they won by 28, but this was not a great game. This game was, if I had to describe it, was bowling shoe ugly. The Bulldogs looked very disjointed going forward. They were essentially helped by the St Kilda defence. St Kilda going forward had no run. The second it left Jack Sinclair's hands, they had no forward momentum. They kicked it on top of Max King's head, and Bulldogs just ran it out, and St Kilda didn't defend. Them not defending meant the Bulldogs had an easy time. The Bulldogs, led by Bontempelli, I think when the game was won, was in those first quarter and a bit, and it was just the Bontempelli show. He was the best player on ground by far, and it wasn't even close. When the game had to be won, he stood up. The Bulldogs stay alive in 9th. They knock a bit more percentage off St Kilda. It could have been a lot worse, but St Kilda did chip something back, so that kind of keeps them percentage not completely blown out the water, and I think that keeps them alive, although their percentage among the contenders at the moment is one of the worst for that 8th spot, so it almost puts them a game behind in a sense. I think for both teams, I think the big question is for the Bulldogs, what can they do? Like, if they serve this up against any other team, especially those in contention, like Melbourne, can they actually pull something back? For St Kilda, oh my God, what is going on with that team? Like, how can they be so good one week, really play well against Geelong, and then fall, and like Carlton, they play really well, and then fall short so badly when it matters? Like, that. What's their best? What's their worst? And I guess that comes back to how do you fix St Kilda? I talked about it in round 1. They've been linked to De Goey. I don't think De Goey fixes that team. I think there's a hell of a lot more wrong. More of that. See episode 1, the St Kilda bit. I'd be worried if I was St Kilda. But there is one thing. I did write this down. I did write this down. Summary. This is a summary of the game. This was a play. Billings demands the ball on his wrong side from Malira, Wanganeen Malira, who was on his natural side. And that just exemplifies selfish behaviour. And to tap it off, Ryder gets injured. Ryder's probably holding them together. Structurally, I think St Kilda, if they make it, like a lot of other teams in that 8th spot, I think they're making up numbers. Don't see them winning a final. But hey, funnier things have happened. Let's move on to Collingwood. Scott Pendlebury, 350. I don't know what you want to say about Scott Pendlebury. how good he's. Would it be fair to say he's I think it's safe to say he's being Collingwood's best ever team. But I think the poise and playing off the halfback, I think he makes 400. But let's move on to the game. I think Adelaide played well. They deserve to win, and I think the fact Collingwood keeps winning means, hey, good sides win. But I think now the question comes to, when does the bubble burst? When does Collingwood actually lose? I think that's a big problem. Collingwood have to lose at some point, these close games. And we were talking about today, I was talking about it with a few friends, and essentially it went to, if these games go the other way, are we talking about Collingwood as highly? And honestly, the answer is no. So I'm going to put a hot take out there about Collingwood. I think if they finish top 4, don't see it happening by the way, but if they finish top 4, they go straight sets, and I think we go out first week of the finals. Again, I hope I'm wrong, but that's just my hot take. I think that bubble pops at some point. It's a matter of when. But I think for Collingwood, everything they've done so far, big tick. Other big takeaways, Rory Laird, 20 tackles, AFL record. He's a one-man wrecking crew. If you listen to me, you probably would have had him with the vice-captain or captain. I think that's always a good shout. Nick Dacos. Has anyone had a better rookie year than him? Of the whole season, as anyone? I think for him, I don't think all Australians happening. I think that's a stretch too far. I think maybe the squad, but I can see him being Collingwood's top vote getter in the Brownlow. I think that's in the realms of possibility. Otherwise, good win to Collingwood. I think the big takeaway for Collingwood, we won't win a final. But where does Grundy fit in? Because Cameron's playing well. Cox looks better without Grundy in the side. Cameron looks better without Grundy in the side. Where does Grundy fit into Collingwood? Not only as a club, but in this 22, because I think that's a big problem. We can't play 3 talls. That's never worked. So I'm curious to see where that goes for Adelaide. I think for them at this point, it's what do they have to play for? Is the queue in the rack? Do you just blood youngsters for them? I don't see what they're playing for at this point. Let's move on to the next game, and I think this is the most disappointing team for me so far this year is GWS up against Brisbane. Brisbane comprehensive 40-point winner, 40-point winners. They just controlled this from pretty much start to finish. There were periods where GWS looked to get on top, but it's too much for too few. You can't expect to rely on Harry Himmelberg, Toby Green, Stephen Caniglio. That doesn't help. Josh Kelly going off with a concussion doesn't help either. I hope he gets better. I hate seeing head knocks. We'll talk about that later in the crappy media call. Again, for Brisbane, that top 4, I'm willing to say they make it. They won the game in the middle of the rucks. Darcy Fort made Mathew Flynn look second rate, and I think that's just emblematic of where GWS is. They recruited Braden Preuss, do not play Braden Preuss. They play Matthew Flynn. Matthew Flynn gets destroyed. I think do you play both ruckmen? What do you do there? I think for GWS, the big question is it worth getting Grundy with those 2 rucks already? And for Brisbane, I think the question is, do they put this all together and have it go into that grand final? Because they've always been around the mark, and then September they've let themselves down a little. Is this the year? I hope it is, because I love watching. I want to see Brisbane do well. I think we all do. On to the next game, North Melbourne v Richmond. I did say, this is quite interesting, I did say North Melbourne win a game. I didn't say it'd be this game, but I would say they won a game. And I think this is the only game where it's emblematic of bad kicking is bad football. 11-22-88 to North Melbourne's 14-8-92. North did really well to shut out the run from Rioli, Pickett, Bolton. So that's what's got Richmond really served Richmond well the last few weeks, is that outside run. They really shut that down, and that allowed them to gain that ascendancy And so when Richmond inevitably came back, they were able to hold them off. Noah Cumberland, he had a really good game, but was it Noah Cumberland? Two goals, I think it was 4 or 3. Jack Rewalt, 2-6 from memory. That's just bad kicking. That kills you as a club. For North Melbourne's Cam Zerha, God, he bobs up and does well once in a while. And Goldstein and Coleman Jones are really finding their groove together. I hope we see Goldstein go around again. I'm not sure how much he has left in the tank, but he's really adapting to that forward ruck role more. He's looking more potent going forward. So I think that was quite nice. Big question for me is North Melbourne. I think I'm going to preface this. I think Noble was always going to get sacked, but I think if they'd beaten Collingwood last week and they won this week, would Noble have gotten sacked? I think he would have got sacked at the end of the year, but I don't think he would have got sacked now. And I guess that parlays into how the hell... I love how people go, oh, they did it for John Noble. That is such a dumb take. If you're saying that, hey, they did it for John Noble, stop. Look yourself in the mirror, question your life choices, and move on. They didn't do it for him. They did it because they want to win. If they wanted to do it for him, they would have done it last week. Or they would have done it earlier in the year. Don't give me that. For Richmond, I think the big question is, have they forgotten to win? Are they making up numbers? Can they turn it around? I think it might be a bit too foregone this year. I think if Dusty leaves, it may not be I think short term it's bad, but I think long term it's a nice little reset, recalibration. I think it is the end of an era for them. I think they've been a great team. They've won 3 flags, so they have done well. But I think this is a nice little reset. Carlton Geelong, I think when I go back to podcast 1 where I talked about the Saints are in trouble, I compared them to Geelong, and I talked about how Geelong was systematically well set up. And I think this is typified by this game where Geelong play such a great team such a great team performance that they don't need a standout to win. Everyone does their role. Everyone does their bit. If everyone does their job, they win. And I think that system is so good and is what exemplifies a great team. You don't need a superstar to turn it on. Everyone does their bit, you win. And I think that's how they beat Carlton. Just those little role players. Carlton always have those players that have great games, like your Walshes. But it's that bottom 6. And I think Geelong's bottom 6 are really strong. And I think that's why year on year Geelong are always there or thereabouts, because their bottom 6 are just so much better than other clubs' bottom 6. Other notes here, Carlton very patchy. they got shut out. McKay got shut out by DeConning, and again, that whole system thing. It's not like a one person does a great job defending. It's a team defense. And that's why I think Geelong are going to go deep in September this year. I think we've seen them on the final Saturday of the year. That's my tip. I think they are making the grand final. Watch them go out straight sets now because I put the mods on them. For Carlton, I guess my big question is, what is a pass mark for them at this point? Is it just making the 8? Is it getting a finals win? I don't know. I really think these next few weeks we will see that. I think if they finish I think they should be playing week 2 of finals. I don't see them making top 4. I think that's out the realms of possibility now. But I think if they're playing week 2 of finals, I think that's a big tick. For me, this Fremantle-Sydney game, probably the most interesting result where I look at and I go, I did not expect that. Sydney, I think, get their mojo back. They should have probably won by more. 11-16 is relatively inaccurate. I mean, Fremantle weren't much better, 9-11. But Sydney, on the outside, created more run. That's the big win for them. So they have multiple avenues out of defence, and I think if you compare it to a few years ago where it was just Jake Lloyd, now it's Jake Lloyd still, but he's less reliant. You got Robbie Fox, Oliver Florent, Nick Blakey, and Dean Rampy. All those avenues out of defence. So if one gets shut out, so this year Jake Lloyd's been shut out a fair bit. So you've had other players step into that role and get the ball out of the back line. And I think that's what makes Sydney on their day very potent. And it was on full display here, where pretty much all of them, bar Blakey, really got the ball out of that defence. This was more a case of they won the midfield, they won the game. A lot of the Fremantle midfielders just got their nice 20 or so touches, and that was it. Fife's really struggled second game back, but I think he'll be better for the run. But can we just talk about Chad Warner? Like, man, second year? I think he's in the All-Australian conversation. I think he's one of those reasons Sydney's going to be such a good team going forward. He is something special. The big questions, do Fremantle, where are they in that top four, in the top four conversation, and where is Sydney in that top four conversation? I think Sydney is the most likely to nab a top four spot off Fremantle. I still think Fremantle hold on, but I think it now puts that question in a bit more doubt. I think that's one of those interesting battles. We move on to the Sunday games. West Coast Hawthorn. I think I called this game a game of no consequence. I stand by that. Neither team's making the eight. I don't know what you want me to say. Josh Ward had his best game. Yay him. He won the Rising Star, so I think that vindicates their early use of his pick. An early use of pick for him. Josh Bruce just showing how good he is. 6 goals. I do want to talk about one thing, and that's Tom Mitchell. Now, Tom Mitchell, they have talked, will he be traded, won't he? I think he stays. But I just want to point out, he had 33 touches. If you go to his stats alone, 33 touches, high five, great job. But he only ran at 54% effectiveness and only 292 metres gained. Now, I know for him that's not the whole story, but I think this shows, I think the lessening reliance or the lesser reliance on Tom Mitchell. So I think that's really interesting there. I think he stays with the club. I know there has been murmurs about him being traded, but I don't see it. For Hawthorn, they tagged Kelly and they stopped so much of that momentum run. So by having Tim Kelly play, they were able to get a lot of run and momentum a few weeks ago where Tim Kelly had that great game. That was capped off by Gaff as well, providing that run out in the wing. So much of that was stopped. I think Nick Nat in that team is so pivotal because he gets a lot of it moving through his ruck work. Otherwise, I think Tom Barras was the standout defender. Sicily's always good, so at this point I'm used to Sicily just playing well and be like, Jake Sicily's doing cool. Jake Sicily's... let's try that again. Sicily's doing well. Good for him. I think for this, the question I think applies to both of them. Can both of these key teams cause some pre-September problems? Can they do what Essendon's doing now and ruin someone's August? Can they challenge someone and go, well, now it's harder for you to make the 8, or it's harder for you to make the top 4, or, ooh, now you're in that little cluster of teams that are contending for 8. So putting them back there. I think that's the role these two play. Moving over to the Melbourne-Port Adelaide game. First game back for Maxi Gawn. And I think this game exemplifies... I know it's only 14 points. I'm going to talk a lot about Melbourne here. This exemplifies how important rucks are. Melbourne dominated the rucks. Now, because Melbourne dominated rucks, I'm not going to say they played well. I'm just going to say they played better than the makeshift ruck line that Port Adelaide and Port Adelaide had of Dixon, Finlayson. Port need a ruck. And because Melbourne did better in the ruck, it allows Petrarca to have a dominant game. It allows Cozzy Pickett to get off the leash and get 6. I don't see how Port make the 8 from here. I think it's a bit challenging. And the big question for me is, does this 0-5 start hurt them? Yes, it does. And for Melbourne, does Keziah Pickett's return to form fix their forward line woes? I think that's a really interesting one to watch because one of the criticisms of Melbourne is they haven't put a team away recently. They've just been winning. Sort of like Collingwood, they haven't put a team away. So I really want to watch that space. And then, this breaks my heart because I'm a Gold Coast Suns simp. This hurts me. Where the Gold Coast Suns fell over to Essendon. I remember thinking midway through the year, man, Essendon are garbage. And now I've got to look at that call and think, God, I'm a moron. Because Essendon's ball movement going forward is so good. How good does Mason Redmond look? How good does Nick Hine look? Like, they don't even rely on Ridley to get the ball out there. Ridley plays more key back these days. And that depends on the team. Like, Redmond has really overtaken that really role of taking the ball out. And he looks so potent. Hine looks so potent going out of the defence. Imagine Essendon play like this from round one. How good will they be? I think the Gold Coast, they revert to the mean of what we're used to, where we get our hopes up and they're disappointing. I don't see... Like, they're still in the mix to make the 8, and it's because of essentially St Kilda tripping over their shoelaces, Richmond falling over themselves. They're in the 8 mix because of that, not because, like, of their own skill at this point. And that really hurts me. So, I think Gold Coast have made their job a lot harder, and the question is, has Gold Coast screwed it? Probably, but I'm still holding out hope they make it, because I am, again, still a Gold Coast Suns simp. And Essendon ties back to what I said about 30 seconds ago. Where the heck was this earlier? Oh my God, they look so good. I want more of this Essendon. I really want to see Essendon just finish the year like this, because I think they're a chance to beat Collingwood. Alright, let's have a look at the media calls. Now, this media call comes from Tim Smith. Now, I'm going to preface this. I'm not going to talk politics. I'm not going to talk Labor. I'm not going to talk Liberal. I'm just going to do a quick intro about who Tim Smith is, what the issue is, and why I think this is a stupid take. So, on Twitter, Tim Smith, I believe this was in response to State of Origin, posted the following. It's so reassuring to see some Biffo and some passion and some old-fashioned Australian masculinity at the State of Origin 2022. The pathetically woke AFL should take note. AFL is now unrecognisable for so many supporters. They don't want another woke round. They want a Biffo round. So, that was his call. Just a bit about who Tim Smith is. Tim Smith is the guy that posted a lot of words around the lockdown, very anti-Dan Andrews. Whatever your opinion of Dan Andrews is, it's your opinion, whatever. But I just want to give you the type of intellect we're dealing with. Now, he is highly educated, but he couldn't rig a Twitter poll. So he made a Twitter poll. This was posted on Crikey, essentially just showing the caliber of human we're dealing with here. He couldn't rig a poll. He put all the emotes, left one emote off, and everyone voted for that emote. Absolute idiot. And then the response to the original tweet is TV star Andy Mars slams disgraceful politician for urging pathetically woke AFL to hold Biffo around. It's irresponsible and desperate crap. And honestly, big claps there to Andy Marr. Now, if you want to say AFL's woke, whatever, we have too many rounds, recognise too many things, don't care. That's your prerogative, that's your thing. I'm not going to stand in your way. I think it's great we recognise people, but hey, whatever. I want to talk about Biffo, and I really want to talk about that idea of Biffo and masculinity here, because I think that goes hand in hand. So, one of the big things AFL's been looking to stamp out is head knock, head trauma, CTE, concussion. And this call, Biffo round, sort of, I'm not going to say it means dudes go out and fight. I think that's an equally stupid commentary. But that go hard at the ball and go through your opponent type of Biffo. So, do you mean like when Tom Stewart went through, I don't know, Dion Prestia like type Biffo, or just players getting crunched in the head and concussed, going for the ball? Like, what do you mean by that? And like, that's so irresponsible. Like, with what we know about CTE and head trauma, is that really the call you want to make, where we want Biffo, like where dudes can potentially ruin their lives through CTE and concussion? Like, why? And like, it's so, it's irresponsible. Whether or not you agree with him politically or whatever, let's look at the CTE. Like, gross. And that's all. I'm going to parlay this. I didn't actually prepare anything for this, but it has really treated my head. People who think, the AFL clubs owe us an explanation for the injury list. Excuse me, no, they don't. Like, I remember I was reading a few forums, and they go, St Kilda, how dare Daniel McKenzie, I believe it's Daniel McKenzie, how dare they keep delaying that? Where is he? Why isn't he playing? I mean, dude had a fucking concussion, guys. He had a concussion. I wouldn't rush that back. Like, fantasy football people were upset Tim English kept getting delayed back because he had a concussion. And, like, honestly, the player's health is number one. If it takes him a few extra weeks to heal from an injury, whether it's a head knock, whether it's a leg injury, who cares? Their health is more important than your self-righteousness belief that you are owed something. I'm sorry, but Tim Smith is a bad media call. Cool. And that parlays into people being owed something. Like, guys, these are people. And you think clubs have transparency? I think the clubs want them out there too, but they're not going to risk their health. And as we know, medical situations are extremely fluid. I think people just need to, pull their heads in and think about what they're saying online because of how stupid they are. I mean, the irony is I'm making a podcast about this, so yeah. But yeah, if you agree with the media call, if you agree with the round recap, forgot to put that in there, please let me know. Tell me what a horrible human I am and how I'm woke and I probably will go broke or something. Let's move on to the team of the week. So, team of the week. This week was a bit strange. Normally I have trouble picking the midfielders. This week the trouble was in the defense, and there were a lot of halfbacks I had to leave off because it was a really good round for those running defenders, getting a lot of drive, and the teams that were successful had that drive for the most part in their backlines. But I'm going to, as always, make a team that would foreseeably play in an AFL round. So I'm not going to pick 9 midfielders and stick them on the half-forward line. I'm not stupid. So, from the backline, Jack Sinclair, Mason Redman on your pockets with Barras as your key back. Jack Sinclair was, honestly, if he wasn't in that team, I think St Kilda look a lot worse. I think we need to reward that. He was probably one of the few reasons that St Kilda were able to get it out of defence. Tom Barras absolutely dominated. He was probably the one shining light defensively for the Eagles, so hooray there. And Mason Redman, I don't know what more you want me to say there. He's playing some great football. Nick Dacos, I think I talked about him in the Collingwood review. 40 touches. I mean, I think he's in the squad for your Australian. I don't see him in it. Nick Vlaston, very similar to Jack Sinclair in that the run out of the back line they provided kept their teams in the game or kept them getting absolutely obliterated in Sinclair's case. And Luke Ryan from Fremantle, been a bit of a different role this year, playing more as a key back instead of that rebounding defender. I liken him to Ridley. So I think really good game here. Kept his opponent, Joel Amati, very quiet and was one of the main outlets out of the defence for Fremantle. So there's that back six. Into the midfield, starting on the wings, we got Ash McGrath and Hugh McCluggage. Now, I know Hugh McCluggage played a bit more of an inside game, but there was enough outside ball that I could justify putting him on the wing. Normally, I like my wingers to play a bit wider and provide that run, but there wasn't really a big wing around. I didn't really want to bring up a half back like a Dacos to play on the wing. I didn't think that was fair. If I can't put midfielders on the half forward line, I can't put halfbacks on the wing line. On the wing, I think that's only fair. In the rucks, Darcy Fort made Matt Flynn look very silly. I think he was the big reason Brisbane won as comprehensively as they did. Marcus Bontempelli, I don't know what you want me to say about him apart from he's an absolute god. He won that game for the Dogs off his own boot in those first in that first half essentially. Dylan Shield, I think he really has rebounded since copying it from the media. That could have easily been Zach Merritt. I think you can switch either of those. Really starting to build a strong back half to the year. Rory Laird, 20 tackles, AFL record. I think that was a really easy pick. and the forwards and bench. So on the half forward line, you've got Toby Green and Keziah Pickett. Ideally, I would have liked Keziah Pickett in the pocket, but as you've seen, I've picked already 2 other pockets, so I had to push someone up. Tex Walker, I would have preferred him to play out the square, but he can go a bit further up the ground. Him and Todd Goldstein were both in the square. I had to put one up for one a bit further up. I went with Tex Walker, but he really caused Collingwood a lot of problems in the last final bit of the game. Easily could have won that game off his boot. Up forward, Cam Zerha did win the game off his boot. Absolute field day. Same with Luke Bruce. And then Todd Goldstein. At the start of the year, there was a lot of talk about Todd Goldstein, not a forward. He has really found his legs in that chop-out second ruck role as well. So he would give Darcy Fort that chop-out. Alternatively, you've got the bench. Christian Petrarca. I mean, you can raffle off those starting midfield spots, and I think they all are equally as awesome. Chad Warner as well probably plays a bit more forward in this team, while Sam Draper is the more recognised second ruck, and Todd Goldstein's probably given that third chop out. And Harry Himmelberg, I put him in the team for either to play more of a half forward or as a half back, because his flexibility is really brilliant, and that was on full display against Brisbane, where they were getting smashed in the ruck, so he ended up actually going into the rucks. He's played forward, he's played back. Harry Himmelberg, I think he's probably been one of the most improved players, especially post-buys in that GWS team, and probably almost the whole AFL. Other players I considered were Jaden Stevenson, half-back role, really big rebound, especially considering how poorly he played against Collingwood. Caden Coleman, Zach Tui, Shannon Hearn, Wilkie, all defenders that could have got in. I didn't really want to pick Wilkie because, like, his whole team got overrun, and I feel like it was him or Barras, and I think Barras had the better game, so that's why I went Barras over Wilkie. Stevens, Coleman, Tui, all as halfbacks. I think the halfbacks I picked just played better. In the midfield, I only really had Joel Selwood and Tom Mitchell as the other midfielders. It wasn't really a big midfield around. Like, the midfielders picked themselves. Patrick Lipinski out wide was a bit unlucky. Same with Zach Merritt on the inside, and Dylan Moore on the inside as well. I just want to point out Dylan Moore. He has come from nowhere, and if you're a Hawthorn supporter, I'd be very excited about him. So that's the team of the week. Let me know if you think I'm a horrible human. Let me know if you think I missed your favourite player, and tell me that I know absolutely nothing on football, because you're probably right. Round preview. So, as always, I do the round preview a little differently, where I talk about and I do my tips on the go. So, I'm just going to bring up my preview. I think, let's start with the Richmond Freo game. This game by the tipsters, $1.92 each. I think this is too close to call. Because it's in Melbourne, I think that's where the doubt comes in. I think this is, if this was in Perth, I think this is a lot more simpler to pick. I think it's a clear Freo win. I think this is Richmond's, not last stand. Like, that's way too premature, but Richmond need to get the W. Like, they need this win to just keep teams like the Bulldogs away, keep St Kilda away, and to a lesser extent, Port and Gold Coast. So it's a crunch game. I think this game, I know it's cliche, it's going to be won in the rucks, because you've got Sean Darcy and Nankervis. Whoever wins that wins first use for their mids, and I think for them, those mids will determine the game. I guess the other thing, if you're Fremantle, you're looking to shut down Rioli, Pickett, and Shia Bolton, especially because they are a big impetus in Richmond going forward with that run and carry. We saw what damage they can do against the West Coast if it's Pickett and Rioli, or in the case of Gold Coast, Shia Bolton almost won that game by himself. For me, I have to go Fremantle. I think they are the better team, but it's one of those games where if Richmond won, I'd be like, oh, fair enough. But for me, I'm going Fremantle, but not with any sort of confidence. North Melbourne Hawthorn, it's in Tasmania. It exists. It's a game of no consequence. I mean, the only consequence is, will Essendon or Hawthorn finish higher? for 13th spot. I think that's like the only consequence. So, sure, I guess I go Hawthorn. If I had to give it a proper analysis, Hawthorn are inconsistent but improving. North aren't as bad as like everyone says they are. Their list probably isn't as bad as everyone says they are. I said North would get a win. I didn't think it'd be last week, but it was. I guess I go Hawthorn as it's a big come down for North, but like it doesn't shock me if North string a second in a row. I will watch this for Team of the Week, but this is like my least anticipated game of the round. Let's get on to a game that interests me marginally more, and that is Sydney v Adelaide. So, Sydney v Adelaide. I think Sydney moved the ball too well, as I said in my recap. They've got so many avenues out of defence and into that wing area that they should win just by sheer weight of numbers on the outside. On the inside, I think this is very 50-50. You've got a lot of midfield bulls. Chad Warner, and Callum Mills, and Callum Mills plays a bit more outside, but he can play the inside game. Luke Parker, all those inside type players up against your Adelaide, which is primarily led by Laird and Ben Keys. Again, I don't know where Crouch fits in. I don't see him at the club. I think he's surplus to needs. But Sydney ultimately should be too good. So you have to back Sydney here, right? Geelong and Port Adelaide. This is in Adelaide. Just as a sidebar, it's the Saturday afternoon game at 4:35. I think Port Adelaide, this is like their last chance. If they don't win here, I don't see a universe they make it. I could be wrong, but I just think they've come from too far back to even be in the conversation is a good effort. Because you got to remember, they're right now 8 and 9. So that means since round 5, they have gone 8 and 4. So if they were if they didn't go 0 and 5 and went 2 and 3, suddenly they're on 40 points. They're in the 8s. So I think they've come from too far back. To come back to this point is a great effort. I don't see the Geelong system breaking down here. They're just way too set up. They don't have a ruck. If they don't get a ruck coming in, I think Geelong will feel very comfortable with Reece Stanley there winning most of their hit-outs, fielding a very competent midfield. So I just don't see how Geelong lose if they get the midfield ascendancy, which they should because they win the rucks. That feeds Cameron. That feeds your Hawkins. It feeds Stengele's feed. I can't stress this enough. Geelong is one of the best set-up clubs in the AFL. I think this is a really easy win. A game that's got me intrigued, and I think I'd be a lot more intrigued if Gold Coast won last week, and that's Brisbane Gold Coast. I want Gold Coast to win. If I could wish for one team to win, it's not Collingwood, it's Gold Coast. I think Brisbane, it's all starting to click. I think for Gold Coast to win, I think Witts has to play out of his skin. I think Took Miller has to play out of his skin because he got held so well by Jai Caldwell. So Brisbane will tag him. So that means guys like Matty Rowell need to step up and have a really big game. I don't see the Suns having that. Not against that experienced midfield in the Lions. I don't see it. And you look at them wide, you've got McCluggage, who's starting to play more inside, but still can kill you out wide. And then up forward, you've got Cam Rayner and Charlie Cameron. Out wide, on the ground. I think Brisbane have too many weapons for the Gold Coast to get the win. Moving on to the other Saturday night game, probably the game I'm most excited to watch is Western Bulldogs v Melbourne. If there was going to be a game where an upset happens, I think it's this or another game. I can see the Dogs pulling it out, but my big question is, if the Dogs serve up what they served against St Kilda, they lose. Make no mistake, that game was not good. They were made to look good, apart from Bontempelli, who's an absolute jet. apart from Bontempelli, the Bulldogs did not look that good in my opinion. I think Melbourne are just doing enough. Gawn's going to be better from the run. Oliver's back. I think those are two reasons Melbourne win. I think for Bulldogs to win, Tim English has to play a blinder. He has to beat both rucks by himself. Honestly, at this point, if I was Bulldogs, I'd say to Bont, you against Petrarca, head-to-head, make him pay on the scoreboard. And this is where my final point comes in. For Dogs to win, the Dogs' midfield has to dominate. Because the Melbourne backline, you would say on exposed form, is too good for the Dogs' forward line. And so that means the Dogs have a reliance on their midfielders and those high forwards or those rotating through the midfield to get goals. Your Treloars, your Libbers, your Dunkleys, your Bontempellis, your McRaes, they need to do a glut of that goal scoring. Next, this is the game. Oh, and I picked Melbourne, obviously. Next one is Carlton v GWS. I think GWS have nothing to play for. I think the Q's in the rack. I think Carlton need a big win just to reassert themselves, and I think that's entirely what happens here. I don't see them losing. I just don't. The midfield, I think Walsh and Cripps should be too strong. I think Bruce has to play. I think you have to play him with Flynn and just outplay De Koning, but I don't even see that happening. So I think it's a pretty comfortable Carlton win. The next match, I think this is the match the boil over can happen. I can see why anyone would tip Essendon with that run and carry. Collingwood haven't been convincing. This is a massive danger game for Collingwood. I am going to back Collingwood in because I am biased in that regard. But I think Essendon will get that win. Collingwood will get that win. What am I saying? Collingwood will get the win, but I think Essendon are good enough to win here. So if you tip Essendon, I totally get it. And then West Coast v St Kilda. This is a big danger game for St Kilda. The way St Kilda have played, they could drop this. I don't see them dropping it because they have a lot to play for. I don't think West Coast have a lot to be playing for at this point. So I think it's essentially St Kilda's game to lose. But if the St Kilda that rocked up against Bulldogs rock up again, like if that happens, it's all over Red Rover. So I'm going to back St Kilda with minimal confidence, and that means my 8, or that battle for 8th spot, is essentially St Kilda on 40 with no percentage against Richmond and the Dogs trailing behind them, with Port and Gold Coast further behind them. I think if I get all 9 based on this, I think that spot to 8th goes down to 3. But honestly, if you're finishing 8th in this year based on the exposed form of St Kilda, Richmond Bulldogs, you are making up the 8. Like, you're going to be beaten by whoever's 5th, and I think that is Sydney at this point. So that's where that falls into. On that note, let me know your thoughts. But let's move on to Supercoach. We're going to do the captain's talk. I'm just going to go through some options, and we're going to pick a Supercoach captain. So, for this round, I'm going to divide it up into pre-Port Adelaide games because I'm assuming you have Treacle. If not, just adjust the advice as you would. And post-Treacle. So, Treacle's injured. He probably won't play for the year for Port. So, you've got an easy loophole in that ruck line or forward line, depending where he sits for you. Just a quick disclaimer. Please remember, you pick the team, not me. I'm just giving some, hey, have you considered this? Or here are what the numbers say. Last week, being the complete genius I am, I picked Rory Laird into Lockie Neal, despite the fact they are playing at the same time. Yay me, great advice. Anyway, realising that mistake and realising it on Saturday morning, I realised, okay, I'm going to vice captain Laird, and I think I'll captain... I forgot who I put as captain. It didn't matter because Laird dominated. And And so that was enough for me to just go, well, we'll go lead. 154. If you went Neil, I totally respect that. 121. I think 120 is the real bare minimum you want from a captain. And we're going to try and use that as our baseline. This week, I have used my 4 brain cells. We combined and we made sure we don't pick 2 captains that play in the same time slot. So let's look at Andrew Brayshaw from Fremantle as our first one against Richmond. We see last time they played 190. I am very interested in that 190. I think that tells me he can go big. I think my only concern is the previous scores, but he's a big lot different. He's had that real breakout season now. So he's a bona fide mid. I don't know how much work Richmond put into him, but Fremantle did have a down game. I think Brayshaw's a really interesting one. If you don't have a top liner like Laird in your team, I think that's interesting. If you want to go Callum Mills, I think that's interesting. Like if you don't have those top liners, I think, yep, that's a reasonable shout. Sicily is my next one. I always put people that play North Melbourne. And I think Sicily, if you are in a hard game and you just want to just have a Hail Mary, I think the Hail Mary on Sicily is a worthwhile play. This year, so I don't know what that 0 is about. I don't remember him scoring a 0, but he's gone big against a few of the lower sides. So Gold Coast, when they weren't playing well, 147. Richmond, 141. If I was going to have one knock on the Sicily pick, for me, it would be, will the ball be up there enough? But I can see them using Sicily as that push forward. North have been playing better, so the ball could end up there a little bit. I think, again, if you need a Hail Mary, you need a player to go big or do or die. I think Sicily's a good shout. He's not for me. I respect it if you do. And I think, especially if you pair it up with some of the people in the captain's section, I think that's totally worth it. Someone I find interesting is Dylan Moore. He's gone big a few times this year. As you can see, this is his first real season going big, so there's not a lot of history. But North do give up a lot of scores. I mean, the last few weeks they haven't, but they gave up a lot of scores against, say, Geelong when they got pummeled. And it's when do North revert to that mean, potentially? So I think there is some element there. I can't predict what Moore will get, but I think it's like Sicily. If you don't have Sicily, but you have Moore in some weird roundabout way, I think this isn't the worst use of a vice-captain punt and hope. But for me, if you have Laird, he's going to be my pick. He keeps getting better somehow. I don't know how. Against Sydney, so let's just put that on top. So we're just gonna move that on top of me. We can see the Sydney, he averages only 91.6, but the last 5, 121, 88, 89, 110, 124. And that 121 is probably the only time he's been playing as a pure midfielder. The rest he's been more coming out of defense. So because of the way he's playing has evolved over the years, I think that in and under game really elevates his scoring and means he has a really high floor of about 110, 120. And with all the tackles and all that, and it's going to be, I think Sydney beat them on the outside, but I think Adelaide match him on the inside. So I think in that regard, Laird will get plenty of opportunities to score, and I can see him going 120 plus. He hasn't really dipped below that amount, so he's, for me, that very safe option. Let's look over onto the captain's half of the board. So we have a look. We can see my first pick is Lockie Neal from Brisbane up against the Gold Coast. He has really been boom or bust the past few years. So if we have a look at the numbers there, we can see a 108, a 64, a 151, 85, 142. This is dating back to 2019. So it is very much feast or famine for Lockie Neal. Now, I think this is going to be a feast. I think he's going to have a big game here because Brisbane have just... I don't want to say more to play for. I just think Brisbane are playing better. And I think that means a bigger slice of that 3,300 pie that every game gets allocated. So I think that puts Lachie Neale in contention to be the captain pick. And I think at worst, he's a safe 110, 120 pick. Ideally, you would want 120 and above. And honestly, he is due for a massive game. So I think I would pick Lachie Neale with a fair bit of confidence. Now, if you don't have Lachie Neale, if you think, nah, you're wrong, or you want to roll the dice on something different, let's have a look at my favourite, Clayton Oliver, who will be back this week up against the Western Bulldogs. As we can see, he is practically a picture of consistency. So, the last 4 against the Dogs, 112, 144, 139, and 100. Clayton Oliver is back. I'm pretty sure he's back. If he's not back, obviously don't pick him, please. But if he's back, I think he is a very good shout. I think everything I've said for Lachie Neale in terms of they're safe and they have that high floor also apply here. But he also has that high ceiling, constantly being able to crack that 200 mark. So I think, again, another good shout. Now, what if you need a real Hail Mary play? Let's look at Marcus Bontempelli. So Marcus Bontempelli versus Melbourne has been relatively consistent. I think he's been consistent this year where he's sort of getting those 100-plus scores, but not, apart from St Kilda, really busting a game open. So the last 4 against Melbourne, 105, 136, 125, 135. It tells me he can get those 120-plus scores. So I think if you want to bank on someone and you're like, you really need the win, and you're like, how do I make up potentially some points and get something that's like a 180 score, because Bont is more than capable of hitting that high ceiling, I think that's worth a gamble. Because if the Dogs are to win, I think Bontempelli has to have a big game. And so I think you can do a lot worse. Now, if you need something a bit safer from the Bulldogs, I think... what's his name? Jesus. Jack Macrae, there we go. I had a bit of a brain fart there. Jack Macrae, I think he's more consistent, 133, 146, 145, 141. That's because Melbourne don't really tag, so it's going to be a more free-flowing open game. I think if you want someone a bit safer, Macrae could be a shout. I think safety, you go in Macrae because he has that really high floor, but he's not going to really smash. It's highly unlikely he smashes out of 180. Or if you need a 180, you're looking at Bontempelli. So I think that's where that decision is. Now, a bit of a left field option. We're going to go Sam Walsh versus GWS. Now, I know his scoring history is not great. 87, 71, 132. I'm aware that's not great. But, and there's a big caveat but here, Carlton have a lot to play for. GWS have nothing to play for. I don't see GWS tagging here. I think that means the midfielders run riot. I think Walsh is Carlton's best player. He's their most skillful player. He can play outside. He can play inside. I think he can go big here. He hasn't really had too big of a game. He hasn't had a massive game this year. So I think that's really in the mix. So I think if you think he'll go big and not Bontempelli, that's where I would rank that pick. For me, I'm really torn. I think Laird's the clear vice-captain choice. And then it's down to Neale and Macrae for me. I'm going to go Macrae with no semblance of confidence. Because of that high floor, I really want the safe captain pick, and I think that's where Macrae does really well. That's where he excels. Now, just remember, this is the important thing. You pick the captain, not me. I can just give you options. If I've missed someone, if you think, actually, what about this person? Leave it in the comments. But on that note, I'm going to wrap this up. So, thank you again for watching. It means a lot that you leave any feedback, that you spend any of your time watching. That is so sweet, and I cannot thank you enough. My big takeaway from the week, I think the 8's starting to get settled. I think the 8th spot's going to just get rolled week 1 anyway. And stay safe, look after yourself, and I will see you next time.